Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 209. What does vegetarian mean? Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. I am Shelly Rael, registered dietitian nutritionist and the founder of Real World Nutrition. And today we're kicking off a 3-part series on vegetarian eating. Now, I promise I'm not here to recruit you into eating vegetarian, but more to explain the nuances and all the confusion, maybe not all the confusion, but confusion assumptions about what this means. Now, some people use the word casually, while others use it in a very strict sense. And many of us know at least one person who says, I don't eat meat, I eat chicken and fish. I know many people who say they're vegetarian, and this is before they even know what I do, so it is an announcement to the world in a lot of cases. But I want to get to some of the details on what vegetarian actually means, the various types of vegetarian diets or vegetarian approaches, as well as some cultural and historical context, some common misunderstandings, and what a very vegetarian lifestyle really entails in daily life. Now, as I said, this is a first part or the first episode of a 3-part series I'm doing this month. So make sure if you want to know more information to check back and listen in the next 2 episodes that drop each Friday. Okay, first up, what is vegetarian? So it may seem pretty obvious to people at the get-go, but really it's not always the case. There is so many nuances. So at its core, vegetarian eating means excluding meat, poultry, and seafood. That's the foundation. But there's different categories, and in a lot of cases, different categories that can be fluid in the sense of people will change on occasion, depending on what their needs are. So let me go through the list of the different types. So there's what we call the lacto-ovo vegetarian, and this is probably the most common type. So lacto meaning dairy and ovo referring to eggs. So this means these are vegetarians who do eat dairy products and do eat eggs, but do avoid meat, poultry, seafood. So not the flesh of the animal. Generally speaking, it's another way we say it is if it had a face, they don't eat it. So a typical day could look like oatmeal with milk, berries, that could be for breakfast, a veggie wrap with hummus, lettuce and cheese in there. It could be black bean chili with cornbread for dinner. So it's not as restrictive as some people tend to see it as. And again, they can have eggs, not can. They do eat eggs in a lot of cases. So unless there's an allergy to dairy and eggs, this again is, as I said, probably the most common type that I come across. Now, dividing those two up, I don't see this as often, but we can have individuals who are lacto-vegetarian, so they do include dairy, but not eggs, and don't have the animal flesh. So the only animal product they consume is the dairy products. So they will include milk, cheese, yogurts, but no omelets, no scrambled eggs, nothing like that. And then on the flip side, we have ovo vegetarian. So they will eat egg products, but not dairy. And eggs might be their primary protein source, no milk or cheese. And again, in this case, still no animal flesh. Now, next up, at least in the order that I'm doing it today, is what is called a pescatarian. And this one tends to spark debate because some people will argue that pescatarians aren't truly vegetarian since they eat fish and seafood. But in practice, I do find that many people identify this way. So after the lacto-ovo vegetarian, before somebody is vegan, I will often see there's pescatarians, so they do eat seafood. And they might eat everything that a vegetarian would eat. So they will include dairy and eggs, as well as things like salmon or shrimp or tuna. Then there's one where I don't hear this as much, but it's referring to semi-vegetarian, which really, in the definition historically, would be somebody who eats birds, eats poultry. So they will have chicken and turkey, as well as the fish, as well as the dairy products, as well as the eggs. So they're cutting out the red meat or the mammals. So mammals, red meat. So that includes beef, pork, lamb, game meats like venison and elk. Okay. Again, that is part of the thing where people say, well, you're not really a vegetarian then. Okay. It's just a world of judgment. I'll just tell you that based on my experience. Now, the most restrictive version is vegan. So if somebody says they're vegetarian, they're probably not vegan because in my experience, again, if somebody's vegan, they'll tell you they're vegan. They don't tend to refer them to themselves as a vegetarian. I'm sure there's exceptions to this. This is just based on my experience. And this is really the most restrictive version of vegetarianism is vegan. No animal products at all. No dairy, no eggs, no honey. Vegan is 100% plant-based. And then on the flip side of that, or the other end of the spectrum, is flexitarian. This is a somewhat newer label, so it's not strict vegetarianism. A flexitarian eats mostly plant-based meals, but occasionally includes meat, poultry, or fish. So it's vegetarian leaning, but flexible. So I tend to say, well, if they're coming over to your house for dinner, they're not going to get all wound up if you have meat on the table, on the menu. They'll eat it. So vegetarian is not one strict definition. It's a spectrum, and it's personal choice. Now, we'll mention this very briefly, and because I did hear an article about this, I listened to a narrated article about fruitarianism, which is really, really dangerous. Actually, the article was talking about how people died from malnutrition, and we're talking in modern times, in this past year, where they only eat raw fruits and vegetables. And really, in a lot of cases, it's not even vegetables. It's just raw fruit. Dangerous. You can look into it, but please just look at it with really a healthy dose of skepticism because it is not nutritionally appropriate and it is a form of disordered eating. So just wanted to put that out there briefly. But I want to talk about the historical and cultural roots of vegetarian eating. So this is not new. It's been around for centuries, even millennia. In India, vegetarianism is deeply tied to Hinduism and Buddhism. So it's a religious observance or more the cultural tradition of not harming animals at its core. And we believe in ancient Greece and Rome, some philosophers promoted vegetarian eating as part of living a moral or healthy life. And even today, you do find vegetarian practices in certain religious groups like Seventh-day Adventists. And their lifestyle patterns, particularly in Loma Linda, California, are studied for their links to long life expectancy. Now, vegetarian eating really found its foothold in the U.S. health and wellness movement in the 19th and 20th centuries, where it was promoted as a, quote, cleaner way of living. So when somebody says vegetarianism is a fad, boy, that's a mouthful. Vegetarianism is a fad. It's not really accurate. It's a way of eating with a deep cultural and historical roots. So if you look at the origin of some of the breakfast cereal companies or founders, some of them were very much on the vegetarianism and even vegan bandwagon. And things like Graham, I can't think of his name, the guy who created graham crackers was in that arena as well. So again, it's not a fad. There are people who do still think of it as a fad diet. It's not. It doesn't qualify as a fad diet. But I do know that a lot of people do, even in their own lives, tend to fluctuate in the type of vegetarian that they are. And again, this is personal choice. So I'm going to go deeper into this in my next episode, but I'll talk a little bit here about some common misunderstandings. So this is where things can get interesting, sometimes frustrating for actual vegetarians. So I've had people ask, well, chicken isn't meat, right? I had a friend, we were at an event where they were serving hot dogs, and she said, do you have vegetarian hot dogs? And they said, yes, these are turkey hot dogs. That doesn't really qualify as vegetarian. So chicken is meat, turkey is meat, fish is meat. It's animal flesh. So if you eat chicken or fish, again, you're not technically a vegetarian if you're eating less red meat. So if you eat chicken or fish, you're not a vegetarian. I did mention like pescatarian and the semi-vegetarian, but in a lot of cases, vegetarians don't see this as vegetarianism. So there, like I said, there's a lot of judgment within this. It's more of coming from other vegetarians in my experience. Another common misunderstanding is that vegetarians eat only salad. Well, that is so far from true. And yes, salads can be part of a vegetarian diet. It should be, part of anybody's diet, really. But it's much broader. It is so much broader. So we've got things like lentil soup. You can have veggie pizza. You can have stir-fried tofu with rice and pasta. And lots of things that you may eat a vegetarian meal without even realizing it. So I find a lot of times, my breakfast is vegetarian, sometimes even vegan. I'm not doing this on purpose. It just happens to be how I'm eating that day. So I have oatmeal with soy milk and nuts and fruit and seeds. That's vegan without really thinking about it. If I have an egg and cheese sandwich for breakfast, that's still vegetarian. So it's a lacto-ovo. So it still qualifies. Again, I'm not thinking about it this way. Some people may be eating vegetarian or vegan without even realizing it, at least for a meal or two. And then another misunderstanding, I alluded to this earlier, is people do tend to mix up vegan and vegetarian. So they'll assume a vegetarian avoids all animal products when most vegetarians still eat eggs and dairy. So again, that's back to the definitions. So why does this matter? Well, because it shows how confusing it can be socially. If you're vegetarian and you go to somebody's house for dinner, you might be served fish because the host thinks that counts. So if you're eating at a restaurant, you may have to clarify what you mean. And a lot of times when I've gone to dinner out with people who are vegetarian, the servers are usually clarifying what they mean. Do you mean vegan? What do you eat? Most meals can be made vegetarian if you look at the menu. So that's just some misunderstandings there. But let's talk about some practical realities. What does vegetarian life look like in practice? Well, dining out can be easy or difficult depending on where you live. Based on my experiences, people don't have to go to a vegan restaurant to be able to order a vegetarian meal. Now, you're not likely going to be going to a steakhouse, but in those cases, you can still find some meals that would qualify as vegetarian. Sometimes you might just be stuck at a place where you're having a side salad and French fries. And French fries, yes, they're vegan. So it's really, a lot of times I find that people think it's a lot more complicated than it is. Again, it's not usually as hard as it may seem. But again, it depends on what type of vegetarian you are. Grocery shopping can take some label reading here. So many soups will use chicken or beef broth. Lots of them do. And you would have to look specifically to find them without the chicken or beef broth. Marshmallows and gummy candies contain gelatin, which is an animal product. So a vegan would not consume those foods. And even things like refried beans, reading the labels, those can contain lard, which comes from pigs. And the other thing is social situations can be tricky. Family or friends may not fully understand what vegetarian means. So vegetarians often have to explain themselves or bring their own dish to share. I've been in experiences where a family member who is vegetarian, comes for the holiday meal and somebody used the cream of chicken soup in the meal. And it's like, well, I didn't make it. I wasn't eating it, so I didn't tattle. I might have just now. But there's just a lot of those things where if people don't fully understand what those nuances are, they may not have something prepared for you, for somebody who's a vegetarian. Now, what will happen if somebody eats an animal product if they're a vegetarian? Well, it's not, the consequences aren't going to be something other than maybe disappointment or somebody upset. But in most cases, there's not going to be a health consequence with one thing. It's just respecting the person's choices there. So vegetarianism, I just make this clear, it's not about strict rules. Some people are committed for religious or ethical reasons. Others just prefer a plant-based approach, plant-based foods most of the time, and others will be flexible when needed. So why do people choose to be vegetarian? So what are the reasons? Now, most people don't need to know the reasons. So why are you vegetarian? That's not as important. I do ask people this more from a perspective of when I'm doing this from the health perspective as a dietitian, it helps me better understand. So a lot of times people tell me they are doing it for health. They want to lower their cholesterol. They want to manage weight. They want to reduce their chronic disease risk. And sometimes that will be something that is when somebody starts following a vegetarian eating pattern, it will help, but not always. So that's where I come in and help people with that. Another reason people choose it is from the environmental perspective. So reducing reliance on meat can lessen your environmental footprint. Another reason is animal ethics. Concern for animal welfare is a strong motivator. So people who really work with animals or have seen how animals are treated may choose that they don't want an animal killed for their nutrition, for their eating. So that's just something what we have to respect that for them. Then there's cultural or religion. So as I mentioned earlier, there are some traditions that do encourage vegetarian eating. But again, I've seen some flexibility with that. Even people who their culture or religion would say you don't eat this type of animal products do. Again, I'm not there to judge, just acknowledging that when necessary, we'll adjust. And then taste and preference. Some people just prefer more on the plant-based protein. So beans and lentils, and then of course vegetables over meat. That's their preference. And as a dietitian, I've seen all these reasons come up. I've even seen reasons that, oh, my girlfriend or my boyfriend's a vegetarian, so I'm going that route as well. But they'll still have a burger when they're not with their partner. And then I've met people who, one is an omnivore, one's a vegetarian. They live together and they've had life plenty of years together and they've figured out how to do it. So the important thing here is there's no single right reason. The reasons are varied for almost as much as what type of vegetarian somebody is. People choose vegetarianism for their own mix of values, health goals, and lifestyle. So it's acknowledging this. So with that, I want to clarify here, vegetarian isn't just no meat. It's a diverse spectrum of eating patterns with anywhere from deep cultural roots, modern interpretations, a lot of practical realities. Some people realizing what works for them, they need to tweak it and go in a different direction on the spectrum of vegetarianism. So really it is understanding what it means, helps cut through the confusion, and makes it easier to respect and support people's lifestyle when they choose this. So again, I am not recruiting anybody to do this. I will invite people to look into it and not just take it lightly if they want to go that route. But next episode, I'll talk more about vegetarian myths and misconceptions, the kind of headlines and sound bites that get thrown around that need some clarity. Okay, so with that ends this week's episode of Real World Nutrition. I will provide a link in the show notes because with this series of podcast episodes is following a series of blogs I did related to this. So with this episode, I'll have the blog that's related to this one, and with the subsequent episodes, I will link back to these as well as the blog posts. All right, everyone, that's it for this week's episode of Real World Nutrition. Thanks for listening. Take care and bye for now.